Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Transmission here on FreightWaves. My name is Sebastian Blanco. Over there, my co-host, Grace Sharkey. Grace, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. After last week's episode, I went into a little bit of a rabbit hole with how semiconductors are made and produced. So I just feel like an absolute expert right now. So I'm feeling great. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, and I'm excited now to have you on the show as a guest sometimes, not just as a co-host. That'll be great. We'll get to ask you lots of questions. But I'm glad you mentioned the show from last week because of your article. I'm going to use your article in the newsletter that gets sent out, and this gives me a perfect chance to remind our viewers and our listeners to sign up for the Transmission email newsletter over on FreightWaves.com. You can just do a search for the Transmission newsletter, and that will take you right there. I won't give you the whole URL here on the show because who can write that fast? So you know how to search. Go ahead and find it. While you're there, you'll see some ads from AIT, and they are a sponsor of this show. And let's listen to one of their ads right now.
Most automakers rely on just-in-time manufacturing to optimize production. That model requires precise coordination throughout every link in the global supply chain, and that's where AIT Worldwide Logistics comes in. AIT's automotive logistics professionals are the experts at developing resilient, scalable solutions for OEM and Tier 1 supply chains across Asia, Europe, and North America. AIT has the expertise, technology, and carrier connections to achieve your production goals just in time. Check out their link in the show notes.
All right, well, today I'm very excited to have on the show Stephanie Brinley. Stephanie, I've known you for a long time. We've never actually spoken on a podcast, I don't think. So this is going to be a fun new opportunity.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, so people who don't know you, you're a principal analyst for the Americas for IHS Markit, and you focus on the consumer car market. Like, as far as I know, you're an expert in just about anything when it comes to automotive. But give our viewers and listeners a little bit of a background as to what you focus on for IHS Markit.
Yeah. I look at the market and I look at what's happening kind of now and going forward. I work with a product which we call auto intelligence and talk about sort of literally what's happening right now. Really, I'm talking to our clients about what's happening in production, what's happening in sales, what's happening in the supply base so they can help make decisions about what they want to do going forward. Part of that is very much the consumer market and what's happening at a product level. Sebastian, I get to see you on media drives for new products because that's one of the things that I do is keep strongly abreast of new products.
Yeah, and that's an interesting topic, but here on this show we focus on the supply chain, and obviously one of the big issues is the chip shortage. So we talk about this almost every week. What can you tell us about where things are today? We had a guest on recently who said that it was his sort of assessment that one of the acute phases of the crisis is kind of here or just about done or just ended, that it's going to get better a lot sooner than some people think. And I certainly saw some relatively positive headlines when I was looking through the news this morning about GM restarting some plants and things like that. Right. But from your perspective, when you're talking to people, just tell us what you think is happening with the chip shortage as of today and moving forward.
Right. We've been obviously following this very, very closely, tailed on to following the COVID production shortages closely as well, too. And we do think that the worst impact for production is in the second quarter of this year. So we're kind of in that really worst point of it is what we expect. But having said that, we do also expect that it will continue to be an issue probably into the first part of 2022. So we don't think that automakers will really start trying to get to a point where they can catch up on some of the lost production until next year. But what they will hopefully be able to do is in the third and fourth quarters of 2021, start to see their supply stabilize so they can at least start moving forward. And again, this is expected to be the worst quarter. One of the things that I think is really important about this is it's an incredibly fluid situation. It's incredibly dynamic. It is not affecting every automaker in exactly the same way. And talk about supply chain. Everybody has slightly different inputs. Each automaker has different priorities relative to what products are most important, what markets are most important, what features are most important. And within that, there's a lot of play. There's a lot of flexibility for automakers to take this fixed supply or the supply of chips that they have and say, where am I going to put them? In what product? Am I going to support which feature or that feature or whatever? And that takes a lot of energy for them to make that decision and make sort of on-the-fly changes. But what it really means is that it's different. It's fluid, and there isn't, unlike the COVID production issue when everyone was shut down for roughly 8 weeks. You just didn't have a choice. You just shut all your plants down. All automakers were kind of in the same position. Everybody had to shut down. This is very different. It's much more dynamic. It's affecting everyone, but it's not affecting them all in exactly the same way.
That's a really interesting viewpoint. Can you, I guess, dive into what automakers are experiencing less of a headache and what they've done to prepare themselves?
Well, a little bit of that. It's we look at some automakers have a little bit more vertical integrations. Hyundai is pretty good with the way they manage some things. I think Toyota got a hold of a little bit of supply first. Part of it has to do with how much technology is in their vehicles, but we haven't done a straight on, Toyota has more chips than Hyundai has, and Ford has more chips than GM has, because that gets into something, I don't know, they don't really want to share, right? This isn't something that we have great insight into exactly how much supply they have. But in watching what they do, one example is General Motors took out the chip that handles the displacement, the active displacement demand for the 5.3 liter V8 pickup truck engine. That means that the trucks that are produced with that engine will get about 1 mile per gallon lower than with that chip, but it also meant they could build it and sell it. We've had some examples of pickup trucks and some other products being produced and sort of put off to the side in the parking lot, knowing they can get a chip at whatever points in the future, and then put the chip into the car and send the car off, rather than stopping the entire production line. We've heard examples, probably more anecdotal than trackable examples, but examples of some automakers pushing vehicles that don't necessarily have navigation, or picking and choosing what packages and what trim levels to build in order to manage that chip supply. And in some cases, it may be a matter of you have X number of chips, but if you produce fewer of the high margin, top of the line vehicle, maybe you can move to produce more of the mid-range vehicle and keep that supply going. The risk of doing that, of course, is you get better margin on the higher contented vehicle. So there's some payback down the road for any decision that you make. But those are the kinds of things that we're seeing automakers do. And again, it's a product by product decision and an automaker by automaker decision. So there isn't a standard rule of thumb that everyone is making the same decision. We have seen, I think, some of the German automakers seem to be affected a little bit less. And exactly why, I don't have an answer for, but we're looking into that element of it as well.
My follow-up was going to be why.
Why? Why are some in fact impacted differently? I was going to say one element certainly is an automaker with a higher production volume in general is going to have a bigger impact, right? I mean, Ford's making 4.5 million vehicles. They're going to have a bigger impact than Mazda's going to have, no matter what you do. So you do have that sort of, the scale of the company does play into it, which also then makes the matrix and complexity of the decisions that they have to make on how to manage that much more complex.
I know that some in the industry were already seeing like sort of hints or rumors that the chip shortage was coming in late 2020, so November, December timeframe. Could that have been that some of these supplier, operators at the OEMs were just sort of a little bit more ahead of the curve and locked in some chips earlier, or do you think it goes a little deeper than that?
No, I think that's part of what happened. I just don't have insight to be able to say X manufacturer did that and another manufacturer didn't. But I do think that was part of the situation. Some people kind of got a sense that it would maybe happen. But, this goes back to, it actually all does go back to shutting production down for 8 weeks. It goes back to people working from home for a year. And when we made those decisions, it's not a light switch. You can't shut down production and make most of the planet stay at home for 8 weeks and turn it all back on and expect it to move smoothly. You're going to have hiccups. One of them was that before this happened, before we shut everything down, there was an expectation for how many chips everybody would need. We shut everybody down, and the demand for consumer electronic chips skyrocketed. And then compounding that, there was an expectation that as we watched what was happening within the economy and trying to assess how bad or how deep recessionary impact was going to be, there was an expectation that the auto market wouldn't come back as quickly as it did. And it came back very strong, and it came back very quickly at the same time that, you know, the consumer electronics people were looking for a lot more chips. So you had this perfect storm of demand for chips happening. And it's just one of those things, too, that just takes time to fix. Our understanding is it's 12 to 15 weeks between ordering and getting that chip. So you have a natural delay in the process in and of itself. And we saw demand coming for chips coming from different areas in far higher numbers than anybody had anticipated. Again, I go to that unintended consequences. You shut everything down, you turn it back on, and you don't know where the snap is going to be necessarily. You don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but we can see there's going to be impact.
One of the things we try to pay a little bit of attention to on this show is just the overall shift towards electrification. And what can you tell us about sort of the amount of chips or the requirements for chips that are used in an electric vehicle versus a traditional ICE or internal combustion engine model? I mean, all cars need these chips these days. You just talked about the engine that, you know, will now get a little less more efficient, right. A little less efficient without a chip in it. But are EVs going to be impacted a little bit more because they just are more high tech and require more chips in general?
I think that what we're really going to see is automakers are going to prioritize what vehicle they need right now. And what we're really seeing is you've got automakers getting into the EV section, so EV market a little bit more now. And so Ford is going to decide how many are we going to allocate to Mach-E, how many are we going to allocate to F-150 production overall, and we'll move that around. And the reason that question is kind of difficult to answer with a very straight, EVs take 10 chips and another car takes 8, so we're going to ship them there, is because it plays into the strategy that the company has and where it is in its product launch cadence and where it is in the market. It plays into the fact that there is an inventory shortage at the dealership level right now, and you don't want your customers unhappy any longer than you have to have them because you do have risk of losing them. And the other factor is it's still temporary. It may feel like early 2022 sounds like it's far away, but it really isn't in the scope of everything. So they're going to be really careful about how they manage those things. And even if there's a delay in some of the electric vehicle situation, I think what we're most likely to see is really a scale back in initial volume. So, you know, if you've got an electric vehicle that you're launching right now, you just may build fewer of them than you thought you were going to, but I don't think they're going to delay or slow the product rollout if they can help it, because the EV rollout is important to the strategy farther down the road.
Mm-hmm. How transferable are these chips? If the companies have the chips, they're in components too, so sometimes it's not like they have like actual little silicon pieces. But is it relatively easy if you have, you know, let's just make numbers simple. If you have 100 and you need to put roughly 10 in a car, can they go in any car, or is it much more specialized than that? Or is that a little too, you know, detailed a question?
The important part of that question, I think, is that it is in the components. And you're right, it's not necessarily the automaker saying I have 10 chips in the warehouse and I'll put one chip out. It's the parts that they're using. There are some, you know, chips that are in their plant that go into things, and they do have some direct control of that, but a lot of it's in components. So it pushes it further down the line. If the supplier can't get it, then you're kind of dancing around too. So that's part of the reason the situation is so fluid and so flexible for an automaker is that it's not just about ordering a chip from the chip maker. It's about the component that it goes into, and that component maker maybe not being able to get the chip.
I guess I do have a follow-up question, and this might come off as like a dumb question, but you know, I'm not as well versed as Sebastian in regards to the actual parts of the vehicle. But, an industry trend that I've noticed is that a lot more people are buying more of like heavy duty vehicle, SUVs, things of that nature. Is that trend causing any issues to this? And is there any other trends maybe consumers are looking to have, like autonomous driving and things of that nature, that might cause more of an issue down the line with chips?
That's a really good question, and they are. The answer is, one of the short answers is, consumers are looking for cars with more technology, which does mean you need more chips. But part of that too is vehicles are developed over a couple of years, and there was an expectation. So I think that some of that increased demand was already built into the system. But what wasn't built into the system was the COVID-related increase that I talked about. So it is indirectly part of the problem, but it's not directly the problem. The consumer trend toward more technology in a vehicle has been ongoing for several years. And so you're looking at automakers and suppliers and parts component suppliers that have already been working toward knowing that they need more chips than they did 5 years ago. That's not causing the problem. But it does play into how they solve the problem. Like I said, maybe making some vehicles with some little less technology, or changing the product mix so that you can get the vehicle that you want out, and maybe not offering or not building right now as many trim levels. Maybe only building 2 trim levels instead of 4. And this is all temporary. Again, that might be something that they do that handles 1 week's worth of production. And then there'll be another week that they do something a little bit different, depending on how things are moving and where the inventory sits. It's amazing to me to kind of watch too how flexible and how easily, and not easily, but how quickly the industry can react. It doesn't necessarily feel quick as we watch this continue to go on, but again, we sort of felt that the COVID pandemic we were never going to get out of our houses, and we feel like we're getting out of our houses a little bit more now. It's a huge problem. It's causing lots of losses, and it's costing automakers and suppliers and the base tons of money. But again, it is a temporary problem. At the end of the day, it is a temporary problem.
Sticking on with the electric vehicles, but shifting away from the chip shortage idea, it seems to me that there's a push recently, at least like throughout this year, that I've seen the automakers announce more of a localization push in making their electric vehicles. VW had the big announcement about their gigafactory battery plants in Europe. Ford and GM, as you talked about, with Ford, starting up big EV factories here, and Hyundai just announced a $7-point-something billion investment in EV manufacturing in the U.S. Is that a trend that I'm seeing is accurate? Is that what you're hearing too from the people you talk to? And what do you think it means for OEMs and suppliers?
It's a really good question in watching the EV investment and development. And I think that it's not precisely localization so much as it is they're getting into the game. For Volkswagen to increase their electric vehicle production in Germany, that's actually it's their hometown, basically. And so they're keeping that initial first plants and the initial first years pretty close. GM and Ford are investing in the United States, and more particularly plants that are closer to their headquarters. If we look at Dearborn and the investment that Ford is making there, if we look at the investment that General Motors is making at now called Factory Zero in Detroit, they're just getting into it. So we haven't gotten quite to the part of localizing to. That's what we will see when GM starts building their electric vehicles in China as well. But right now, we're really seeing them get behind this and ramp up their production to get to some of the numbers that automakers have been talking about. Ford just said yesterday that in 2030 they expect to see about 40% of their global sales be electric vehicles. They don't today have the capacity to build 40% of their output in electric vehicles, so they're going to have to invest, and they're going to see changes. General Motors has made similar kind of broad sweeping commitments and aspirations. They're going to make a lot of investment to do that. So it's more about them getting into the electric vehicle business than it is where it is, and where the where relates to. You start a new section of the of the industry, and you get into technology that you know, but not necessarily as well as internal combustion engines at this point, and you want to do it a little bit closer to home if you can.
Well, I think one of the, for me, the exciting part is it gives the automakers, which then gives us sort of more flexibility, more just options. I know when we were at the Hyundai event where they showed off the Santa Cruz, I asked them, this seems like the perfect car, the perfect, sport adventure vehicle, whatever they call it, that would, could be used as a hybrid, because they're targeting it towards it's a small urban vehicle that can also go, the distance and take people somewhere fun for the weekend, but they're not offering any sort of plug-in option on that one. And they said, well, it's because we're going to build it in the U.S. and all of our electric, manufacturing stuff is over in Korea. So now that Hyundai wants to start making EVs here, that all of a sudden gives them the ability to potentially make a electrified version of the Santa Cruz or other vehicles that they couldn't have done before.
That's true. With the Hyundai case, and my understanding is that it was a bit of a surprise in the changing of the strategy when they announced that decision. I don't think that we were expecting it quite as much. And it does change. And you're right, that does give them, because the ability to build electrified vehicles in the United States, and they had been importing them. It does open up the potential for a hybrid vehicle version of the Santa Cruz. And one way to think about it too is we're going to see more electrified vehicles in the coming years, and any type, whether it's hybrid or plug-in, because that's where regulations are pushing everything. So I agree. It was interesting to see the Santa Cruz not have a hybrid to begin with. And part of that I took away, though, too, is Santa Cruz is in a whole new segment. They're really bullish about what they can get out of it, but it's also unproven. And one way to control your risk in there is maybe to not have, 6 powertrain offerings, and to keep your powertrain offerings pretty simple to begin with, and then move forward and figure out where the real demand is for the vehicle. And Hyundai, the vehicle is sharing a platform with other vehicles in the lineup. They have the powertrains to be able to do that. So making that change down the road shouldn't be too incredibly difficult for them.
I think that just even how you ended that really makes sense to the overall problem with the chips, right? Is that if we are able to have some of these facilities, these manufacturing facilities closer to home, then we can have chips made for the specific reason that we want them or need them made, allowing for a little bit more flexibility, I would think, within their supply chain. Would you differ?
It depends on where the components themselves are coming from. Like we pointed out earlier, it's not always. There are some chips that the automaker is putting in certain places, but a lot of times it's coming in an infotainment system. It's coming in an ECU, an engine control unit, that may or may not be being built next to where the vehicle is assembled. So yeah, there is a move and a push to see some more chip production localized in the United States. And I don't know that that's essentially the solution to this temporary problem. It would be great if we had more production in the United States. I'm not suggesting that more manufacturing in the United States isn't important. It is. But I don't know that it would solve this particular problem. The perfect storm that caused the shortage had nothing to do with where these chips are produced. The fact that they're only produced in a couple of places, again, that's not why there's not enough. There's not enough because we shut things down. We had an incredibly high demand from consumer chips that wasn't anticipated. We thought that the auto market would be shorter than it was. So I think some automakers kind of scaled back a little bit and said, I might not need as much as I thought. And then lo and behold, they did need as much as they thought. And so there was this intense pressure. And I don't think that having extra plants in the United States is a solution to that kind of a perfect storm. So I don't, more plants, I think that we do need more chip plants, but that rides more on the fact that part of this shortage is ongoing and that we don't really see auto demand for chips coming down after this. It's not like the demand is going to go away. So I feel like there was already some pressure to get more chips into the system and we needed more manufacturing, which I feel like would have happened more likely in a more organic, natural way. As these chip makers realize that they need more production capacity, they will build it. But we had extraordinary external impacts that meant you needed it right now, and that was unpredictable. There's no other point in history where we literally shut down global manufacturing like this. I mean, even in you looked at World War II, there was a shift of manufacturing one thing to another, but this is the only time we've really shut everything down the way that we did. We needed to. I'm not suggesting that it wasn't the right thing to do given the circumstances, but it creates some things are going to take some time to dig out of.
And that's something we'll keep on watching. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us here in Transmissions today. We'll be seeing you down the road, and hopefully have you back on the show to talk whenever the next chaotic event happens.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll happen. All right, thanks, guys. Glad to join you this afternoon.
Thank you.